Today, I'm going to show you how to be smart about your gun choices in Escape from Tarkov to get the best performance with the lowest cost on budget runs. We're going to move through the different weapon styles, starting with the smaller calibers and ending on the most powerful, beginning with SMGs as some of these are extremely cheap. My favourite currently is the Uzi on Mechanic 1. Costing 1 insect pipe wrench, you can get a suppressed Uzi with a laser already attached for around 25,000 rubles. It only comes with a 20 round in the barter, so you probably want to make it a 32 at least, which can be bought from Peacekeeper 2. The Stormworks mount is 3k, and then you can attach any sight that you like. Do bear in mind that this Uzi is the 600 RPM version of the weapon, so unlike the Pro Pistol or the Pro SMG, it only fires half as quickly. Typically for an SMG, this would be a disadvantage, as you normally want a high rate of fire for an increased number of chances to hit headshots, but in this case, as we're going budget, we want every shot to count, and the slow rate of fire can actually help with controllability. In terms of ammo, as with all 9mm weapons, you have the option to dip into the flea market. PST is considered the standard bullet, and we can spice that up with AP 6.3 or PvP if we want to for the increased pen chance against helmets. This can significantly increase the overall cost very quickly if you're not careful though, as AP is normally about 500 rubles a round and PvP is well over 1,000. So if you want to do this, then top up your mags with a few extra high pen rounds over the PST and try to label your mags too so as not to waste it on scavs. If you want a higher fire rate, although I love the MPX, it's not as cheap as the MP9 out of the box. This is only 30k, even directly from the trader, and I'd personally rather have the straightforward MP9 rather than the MP9N, because 900 RPM is already fast enough. 1100 on the N version means that you'll just be emptying mags even faster for very little benefit. Unfortunately though, because you need Mechanic 2 for the suppressor mount, plus the 25k for the suppressor itself, this ends up costing about the same as the SD version of the MPX, especially if you build it yourself with the new parts. I have a full video on the MPX if you're interested that I'll link above, but in short, you can take the Peacekeeper version, or the one from the Flea, and then swap out the barrel for the SD shortest version and add the suppressor that goes with it. I'm an unashamed MPX lover, so that is my choice for the caliber, but you can choose the other options if you want something a little cheaper. So back to the extreme budget, we have the 9x18s. You can grab the Kedders and the Clins from the market, usually under 20k, and this bargain reflects their limited options for really any kind of modding and a max mag size of 30. However, the irons are actually pretty good on these, so a sight isn't really necessary, especially because of how little recoil they have. It is possible to put a red dot onto them at the front, but you need to add another mod to do this. My preference is the Kedder B with PBM ammo. At 28 pen, this is a only slightly worse version of AP 6.3 for a fraction of the price. It can be bought on Prapor 2 and is barely more expensive on the Flea. I used this one quite a lot this wipe on factory, and given that it also has a fire rate of 900, it is perfectly adequate as a close range head tapper. But if you really want to power up your PMC fighting ability, do consider the UMP. These are about 30k on the flea market and can be suppressed for a further 25, and they come with all the rails to attach lasers, sights and foregrips right out of the box. But the real trick here is the 45 AP ammo, which can be bought on the flea market as well. With 66 damage and 38 pen, this is actually very powerful against players with class 4 armor on, with a 2 or 3 hit kill to the chest in the vast majority of situations. Yes, it is expensive. At about 1,000 rubles a bullet, you don't want to just be mindlessly mag dumping these, but as an option as soon as you get to level 15, with the UMP's slower fire rate and 25 round mags, it's not as crazy as it is with like the 45 Vector for example. As an aside, if you do want to go mad, the 45 Vector is really cheap right now. Even with FMJ, this guy is vicious because of the 1100 RPM fire rate. Normally what puts people off early is the 30 round mags. It's either not enough bullets or it's level locked to Mechanic 3. But this wipe, strike cigarettes are usually about the same price as the magazine, if not less, meaning that you can actually use the barter on Skier 2 and get access to these 30 rounders really early. I used .45 a bunch last wipe, and especially the AP bullets, and it is way better than I expected it to be, especially at range. Because it's a slow projectile with relatively good ballistic properties, it just doesn't lose damage and pen over distance in the same way 9mm does, and this means you can get kills that you wouldn't expect to normally. Before we continue, are you fed up of eating tushonka day after day after day? Well, you're in luck. With today's video sponsored by HelloFresh, you can put aside the beef stew and get 10 free delicious meals, saving both time and money, and after that, as everything is pre-portioned, you only pay for what you need. As the father of 2 kids, I know, shocking, but sometimes there just isn't the time or energy to make a fully wholesome meal from scratch for everyone, and HelloFresh has been great for both me and my wife to try out new meals stress-free without the hassle of sourcing ingredients, making recipes, or buying in bulk. I'm certainly not the best in the kitchen, but even I can make these no problem. It's super easy to try something new, featuring the biggest menu yet from America's #1 meal kit, as with over 50 dinner options, you can find something to match both your lifestyle and tastes at the same time. For example, if you're looking for a health kick in the new year, HelloFresh now has over 30 calorie smart and protein smart recipes to choose from each week, packed with fresh ingredients to make staying healthy simple. With customized deliveries week to week down to the delivery dates, you can mix and match all of the options to suit your needs, such as family friendly like us, quick and easy, vegetarian, or even skip a week if you're not going to be at home at all. The menus change seasonally throughout the year, offering peak ingredients and flavors of every season, so you won't be left picking the same meals over and over again. And when you try HelloFresh now, you'll get free breakfast for life. You can start your day with 1 free breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. I must also thank each and every one of you who does sign up, as each subscription helps to support the channel and all the things that I do over here. So click the link in the description or use my code and get 10 free meals plus free breakfast for life. 1 breakfast item per box while the subscription is active if you're in the United States. Outside the US, the local discount will apply. So speaking of slow bullets, let's move up a little bit to 9x39. This wipe, I've been loving the VSK. For 55,000 rubles, you get a suppressed weapon that can fire some of the best bullets in the game, which can be found in raid fairly often, although only in small quantities. On the market, you can choose between SP5 with 71 damage and 28 pen, and SPP with 68 damage and 35 pen. Whilst the latter is normally double the price at 500-ish versus 250 for SP5, do not underestimate the difference that 7 pen makes in this particular range. Against Class 4 helmets, for example, SP5 will basically never pen on the first hit, whereas SPP will do so just under half of the time. Against Class 4 armor, SPP is usually a 3 or 4 shot directly to the chest, but SP5 is more like 8. Considering misses, stomach shots, arm hits, etc., this equates to a massive difference in time to kill. The VSK itself is very limited in terms of modding, and the ring mount for lasers is locked to Skier 3, so typically I either take it with a Cobra, which lets you put on a tactical device at the side at the cost of a little more height overboard than usual, or just use an OKP7. The other downside to this gun is the 20 rounder mags. This is somewhat offset by the 700 RPM fire rate not being too high, but in CQB you can certainly be outshot by dedicated SMGs and short-range assault rifle builds with high ergo and more bullets. So, moving on to the budget assault rifles, we have to talk about the 74U. Given that you can find amazing ammo in big boxes for 545, most players will end up using these AKs at some point during the wipe, if not at least for Punisher Part 3, and you can buy everything up to BT with 37 pen on the fleet as well to supplement what you get in raid. The recoil on these guys is admittedly pretty high, so don't expect miracles on full auto at medium ranges without spending quite a bit on mods, but for close range you can go with some real bare bones builds that work just fine. If you want proper bang for buck, I'd probably just run it loud. Just buy a standard 74U from Prapor, add the Pilgrim rail so you can put on a sight, add the B11 handguard with a VFG for a very cheap ergo, and grab an RRD 4C from the flea market for about 10k. These are extremely good for recoil reduction and a trader flip to low prices normally. This makes the whole thing cost about 45,000 rubles. If you want to go further, a PT1 stock is usually the next best upgrade after adding the PT lock, and remember that these days you can add the butt pad to it as well, unlocked after Gunsmith Part 6, which gives it the same stats as the PT3 with only a little bit more weight. If you start trying to suppress this gun, you'll end up increasing the cost a lot or reducing its performance. The cheap 545 suppressors universally suck, and the 556 versions that are usable now with the addition of the CNC Warrior adapter are probably going to set you back at least 40k, and that's with the parts unlocked from the trader. So until you have the CNC Warrior unlocked properly from Mechanic, the best way to suppress your assault rifles remains in the 556 camp. My favourite weapon here is the G36C. From Peacekeeper, this costs about 60,000 rubles, but usually it's cheaper to buy one off the fleet and then convert it. With only Peacekeeper 2, you can swap over the barrel and the handguard to the short versions for 18k. This means that, depending on exactly which G36 you ended up buying, you can actually end up profiting from this once the old parts are sold, making the gun more like 35 to 40k instead. As you don't need the CNC adapter either, suppressing this is slightly easier. The KAC plus QDSS suppressor combo is probably the cheapest at around 30k if you don't care too much for stats. Ammo-wise, with the flea open, you can buy M855 very cheaply, which is normally a Peacekeeper 3 bullet, or M856A1 with 38 pen at about 1000 per round. This is expensive, so when combined with the gun, it's possibly not really budget anymore, but it depends on your definition and how much you're willing to shell out. As opposed to the MDR and the SCAR, the G36 has a similar fire rate to the M4, so you have to be a little bit careful with your ammo expenditure, but this is also what gives it fantastic time to kill and headshotting ability as well, so it's a double-edged sword. Moving up the caliber power to 7.62x39, as usual, you have the choice of a more typical assault rifle or the SKS. The SKS is obviously more budget friendly, both on the gun itself as well as in terms of ammo consumption, and historically, if you wanted to mod it at all, you had to use Jaeger's OP SKS. But with the base version on Prapor 1, these days there's a rail on Jaeger 2 called the SKS Leapers UTG Pro MTU-017 mount, yes it just rolls off the tongue, for 10,000 rubles, which gives it the ability to attach basically any scope that you like. However, if I was going to run the SKS, I'd probably use the mechanic barter for 3 weapons parts. This usually ends up at about 35k and gives you a way better UAS modded SKS instead. You can still use the Leapers rail with this version if you like, or just use one of the dovetail mounts instead. It's up to you depending on whether you're looking to get a 30mm mount onto it or not. Most of these side rails are a little bit finicky about ringed optics, with only the SAG AK side rail letting you do it, but this one is locked to Skier 3. The Hexagon SKS suppressor is about 30k if you choose to use it, and with the ability to use PP bullets from the flea market, this is very powerful for the overall price. With 59 damage and 41 pen, the 900 ruble per round cost is less problematic on the SKS given that it can be top-loaded instead of using magazines. The alternative here, also using PP bullets, are the AK-103 or 104. These are quite a bit cheaper on the flea than the AKM series, and they have better base stats. While not working out quite as well when fully modded to meta, as a budget build these are very strong. How much exactly to mod them ends up being a sliding scale, from very little up to 70,000 of extra mods on top of the base 30k weapon price. Much of that is, as usual, the suppressor, which costs about 30k, of which I like the DTKP the best for overall ergo loss plus decent recoil reduction, but there is much to be said for the RRD 4C compensator for close range aggressive builds. This reduces recoil by a lot, 8 versus the DTKP, and requires almost no fussing elsewhere to keep the ergo sensible because it's not a suppressor. Using an RS-47 handguard, a VFG grip, the Bastion rail, and a PT-1 stock, the unsuppressed build only comes to around 80k, or 100 if you go suppressed instead. My general thought process for the 103 and the 104 is that I'd rather use the 104 when I'm likely to be fighting inside more often. The shortness of the weapon helps to not barrel stuff yourself against doorways and windows. For the maps that are much more outdoorsy, you can choose the 103 instead for slightly lower recoil. Alright, so what about when you want to pack even more of a punch but still not spend a fortune on weapons? The first gun I have for you is the RFB. There are many reasons why this one is better than it used to be, and firstly that it is so cheap now. If you barter CPU fans for gas analyzers, this costs you about 4 to 5k per analyzer because no one can use them in their hideout anymore from the flea market. 2 analyzers gets you an RFB from Skier 2, so you can technically buy it for 8k, which is bonkers. The catch is, you can't barter for more than 1 gas an per reset, so you have to be doing it consistently to make it work. Even in the absence of this though, it's only 35k using analyzers from the flea. Doing 1 barter and 1 regular gas an will make the RFB cost about 20k instead, which is still insane. The second reason is that 7.62 NATO got a buff this wipe, including BCP FMJ. This one is important as it's the best one that you can openly buy. Everything above it, starting with M80, is not allowed on the flea and hasn't been allowed for a while now. FMJ is 83 damage and 37 pen this wipe, up from 35, which makes it that much more powerful against class 4 armor. M80 is purchasable from Ref 3 still for GP coins using Arena, or from Peacekeeper 4 after doing Revision Lighthouse, but by then you'll probably not be using budget weapons anymore. The third reason that the RFB is actually pretty good now is the newish parts that solve the problems that always used to plague it. At Skier 2, you can buy the 3-inch quad rail mount, which allows the RFB to take flashlights and lasers, many of which provide the elusive point fire bonus without doing an elaborate workaround using scope mounts and the rangefinder, as was the case in the past. With high base recoil and a bullpup config, you can't really make it good per se. The lowest recoil configuration is 104, so the best way is just to maximize ergo, for which either the Daniels Defense Wave or the Hybrid 46 is probably the best. Scopes are of course quite expensive, but as we spent so little on the weapon itself, we can justify at least the TAC 30 if it's one that you like as the entry-level variable on the 30mm ring mounts. The Schmidt & Bender 128 or the Sig Tango 6T are also usually a bit cheaper than the Voodoo and the Razor if you like those, and with the variable zoom function now, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. Obviously, the fixed scopes are way cheaper. The Swamp Fox Tri-Hawk and the ACOGs are normally under 20k, giving 3.5 and 4 times options if you really want to scalp what's possible to do cheaply. Unfortunately, however, as the RFB doesn't have a canted mount slot, you're then stuck with these choices no matter what. The ACOG technically has a backup mounting option for the RMR, but after all this, it costs about 50k anyway, so you may as well have just bought a normal, decent optic. Now, I usually like to put the SVD in this list because it packs such a punch even at stock, but at 90k it is a bit of a stretch given how situational it is to use without any mods. But I am intrigued why we haven't seen more of the SVT. This is on the flea market at under 60k and is also chambered in 54R, and honestly, it's not that bad to control compared to my memory of it. It is the definition of limitations. You can only attach the PU Mosin scope, which frankly sucks, but it only costs 15k and you can take it on and off the weapon as you need. The ions aren't terrible, and so I really think that this is a contender for those of you who'd rather smash enemies in 1 or 2 hits. The great benefit of using 54R is that you can buy anything up to T46M and LPS. These are very similar, with 41 versus 42 pen and 82 versus 81 damage, meaning that they easily slice right through class 4 armor. LPS is not a tracer and so is much more expensive on the flea market, but as the SVT is a bit closer range than the other weapons in this caliber, the tracer on T46 doesn't really matter as much, not for 3 times the price at least. I'm probably going to give this gun another try at some point to see how it fares in today's Tarkov landscape. I want to finish with a final note about shotguns. These days, I'm just not that keen. Between the way armor works with no gapping, to the increased amount of equipment with face protection available to PMCs, and the recent adjustments to the neck hitbox. But if you're really keen, I think you will either have to go for center of mass with Flechette or Piranha if you can't get it, or the legs with one of the buckshots. Buckshot of any kind is still really powerful if you can get into a situation where you have clear line of sight lower than the waist, but as you can imagine, it gets really tricky in corridor quarter peak situations, and so it requires some tactical positioning to get it to work. Magnum is the best on paper and has the hidden advantage of being able to headshot people out to about 50 meters with one single pellet, but the dramatic increase in recoil makes it a personal preference whether to use this or one of the normal ones like 7mm or 525. Either the MP153 or the 155 are still probably the best to use on a budget given the 8-rounder mags and the fact that they have a higher RPM than the other shotguns when spam fired. I prefer the 153 despite being worse on ergo than the 155 purely because I like the ring sight that it can take that the 155 cannot. So there you have a bunch of ideas for budget runs in your next game. Uzi, MP9, MPX, KEDB, UMP, 74U, G36C, SKS, AK103 and 104, the RFB and maybe even the SVT. So next up, go and check out my video on the MPX showing the new builds that you can make with the parts that came this wipe. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.